does Billy play the circle game, or does the circle game play him? Hello, welcome to Books and Booze. This is a series where I talk about books and I have some booze. I'm Alex. This time I'll be talking about Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing, which is part of his Border trilogy, which also includes All the Pretty Horses and Cities of the Plain, which I am currently reading. I've been holding back on covering books that are in series on this channel for a bit because I wasn't sure how I wanted to approach talking about books that I know are part of a series. So I decided I was holding back and just to start putting them out there as I go through them rather than waiting till I read the entire series to talk about each book in it. I've had some other ones in the backlogs that missed out and I just haven't had time to gather my thoughts on it since then. So let me know if you prefer this or if you think it would be better if I waited till I read a whole series, but for the time being I'm just going to put videos out there as I go through a certain book series or trilogy and so forth. The booze for this time is me sending off this bottle of Glenmorangie, I think I said that right, their La Santa 12-year single malt Scotch whiskey, which is specifically a sherry cask finish. I think that's what makes the La Santa a little bit different than their usual 12-year single malt. So it's a blend between two different barrels, in part of American oak and then in sherry cask finishes at the end of it. So here we go. Cheers to Cormac McCarthy. It's a little bit simple, surprisingly. For a Scotch you certainly get just very in your face Highland Scotch flavor. It's very kind of toffee-ish, maybe even like candied raisins or something like that, but it's kind of just one note in that way. I think mainly like the toffee kind of flavor you get from it. That's why it's it's whatever. If you can get a glass of it somewhere, maybe do that. I don't know if I would recommend getting the entire bottle. The Crossing is a 1994 novel by the American literary titan Cormac McCarthy. It is his second novel in his Border trilogy. The Crossing follows a teenage cowboy named Billy Parham, and it's entirely separate from the first book. All the Pretty Horses is his own story. And he lives on this ranch in New Mexico with his parents, and it takes place in the late 1930s. At the beginning of the novel, Billy is working alongside his family to hunt and trap a she-wolf that's been killing local cattle. He eventually does capture it, and once it's captured, he gets this idea in his head that the wolf is from the Guadalupe Mountains in Mexico, and he suddenly creates this quest where he's going to return the she-wolf to her natural habitat. So he embarks on a journey, and there is a crossing into Mexico, and the things don't go well. There is a lot of violence and loss in the novel, as most people come to expect from a McCarthy novel, and some other plot points include Billy's brother Boyd joining him and starting a dangerous love affair with a Mexican girl. And that doesn't really capture all of it, but that's the main flow of this novel. Throughout his journey, Billy encounters these interesting characters, and there's actually multiple border crossings. And they engage in these conversations about God and evil and fate and storytelling and meaning-making in a very direct way. It's sort of my jam. As an example, one of my favorite encounters is with this ex-Mormon, who I think is now a Catholic, and who resides in this region that's been devastated by earthquakes, to understand why God would conscript and command such disasters to happen. It is one of my favorite sections of the novel. It's a blast to read and has fun, weighty ideas presented in a very unique and interesting way. And I probably don't even really need to introduce Cormac McCarthy, but if you don't know, he has kind of become a titan of American literature. But this trilogy specifically is what I want to focus on, is what kind of gave him mainstream success and acclaim. I'm not going to go into too much detail about his bio since he's so well known, but I think the Border trilogy, from what I'm gathering, is a pretty interesting transition point in his life and my experience with his work so far. All the Pretty Horses, when I read it, was a very cut and dry, like Western novel. It felt strangely basic, though I think there's a lot of nuance and detail to extrapolate from it. And The Crossing more so reminds me of Blood Meridian, which was my only other encounter with him so far, as it's pretty melancholic and kind of bleak, but not like hellishly bleak like Blood Meridian. I think ultimately what I've seen in these two novels is kind of a maturing in his writing, and he's searching for this balance between the sacred and the profane in a really meaningful way. And I think you can also see a lot of his lifestyle at this point. He had eventually, at this point, moved out to Texas. He was living in this kind of ramshackle building behind a shopping center in El Paso. And I think to one degree, especially with Billy, even more so than John Grady in the first novel, you can see McCarthy himself kind of projecting a lot of maybe how he feels into this protagonist. He's sort of this destitute hero embarking on a series of arguably doomed quests. And he's trying to capture something about the strange and bewildering landscape that is the American Southwest and the people who live there. And with that comes a few of my caveats that I feel about specifically maybe this era of McCarthy's writing and something very specific to the Border trilogy in general that I've been struggling with. And that's that the Spanish sections are quite daunting. There are times where entire conversations, and ones that seemingly by context seem very meaningful, are in Spanish. You are given no translation. I believe that's completely intentional. And I have no idea what they're saying because I know very little Spanish. Through context, I can pick up on some of it. I'm sure if someone knew even more Spanish, you're going to get a little bit more out of it. I know some French. It's a Romance language. I can kind of get some of the words that they're getting at, but for the most part, I'm relying on other context and descriptions of the scene and imagery and how characters are reacting to things to really understand what's going on. And I do mean there will be substantial sections that are entirely Spanish in terms of the dialogue. I'm not sure what I make of that decision yet, other than it's maybe supposed to also make you feel like a stranger in a strange land like these characters do when they cross the border into Mexico. The only other thing that I've kind of seen with this era of McCarthy's writing, namely I know this is a big criticism with No Country for Old Men, is just that he certainly belabors a point or idea or question throughout multiple times with more so The Crossing, not as much as All the Pretty Horses. I'm seeing it a little bit with Cities of the Plain as I'm reading through it. We get it. There's a bunch of stuff about fate and the circular nature of history and being, and you're going to know it. Characters are going to repeat it again and again. But hey, at least it sounds good while he does it. I think that's more so a criticism leveled at No Country for Old Men, not as pretty on the prose. What that teeters into is some of the things that I really, really liked about The Crossing. That is that this is much more mythic and mysterious than All the Pretty Horses, which I think really threw me off. For example, the she-wolf sections that you'll read, that you literally get a few sections that are written from the perspective of the she-wolf. The vivid descriptions of flora and the landscape are just absolutely incredible. And then he does a really unique thing where he'll juxtapose that with that perspective of humans and their sections, which is much more utilitarian, sparse, not a lot of detail. They see the countryside, they say, hey, there's the countryside. It's not as vivid as it is when we get the perspective from the she-wolf. And what I really like about the character of Billy, maybe a little bit more than John Grady and All the Pretty Horses, though that changes in Cities of the Plain, is that he's a character that's pretty easy to get behind and want to follow and want to ultimately root for. There's a sense of innocence to Billy, and there is with John Grady too, but Billy's sense of innocence seems a little bit different than John Grady's, as you get an idea about why John Grady is maybe disillusioned in All the Pretty Horses, and you certainly get that with Billy to some degree, but there's something about him that seems like he genuinely wants to do something right and good. But he still grapples with kind of this cowboy myth and that sense of masculinity that is very well known in that region of America, and I would say in the United States all around. Billy feels more further steeped in a coming-of-age story than my experience about John Grady and All the Pretty Horses. And what I think that really tees up to do is when you feel that way about him during the first few sections of the novel, it makes the ending all the more powerful, which I will talk about later on, because The Crossing probably has one of my favorite endings I've read in a long time. And though belabored, I do really like the themes and ideas that this story explores, namely that of fate and cycles and storytelling. These themes guide the entire novel and basically lay the foundation for any encounter that Billy has with all these interesting characters during his journey. But trust me, you'll know those are clearly the themes. As I said, they're laid out clear for you and get a little bit belaboring at times. When you read these characters and their struggles and positions, there is a question around if they put themselves there or not. It's a harder question than you might think. What is fate? Is fate a real thing? Are you always guaranteed that? This novel, as with many other great novels, doesn't really give you an answer as much as an exploration and kind of poses that question to you. And I think the novel overall wants to ask, can one escape a cycle? Or more pointed to the language of the novel, a story. For example, I mean, if you're thinking about something like earthquakes, which are one of the moments that shows up about how the story influences the land and people can't seem to escape it, or even revolutions, where it's, even if someone's an active member of that, did they actually put themselves there? Did greater things at play end up pushing them into that situation to begin with? You are invited to see how Billy makes choices, especially repeated ones, that lead to violence and loss. It ultimately becomes a question about, does Billy play the circle game, or does the circle game play him? Some characters allude to an idea of freedom, though they are also at the same time trapped by their perception of freedom or an obsession with freedom. And I think that goes through both novels in the Border trilogy and the third one from what I've seen. That's kind of a big overarching theme for the series. You certainly see it with Billy and specifically his brother Boyd, as not to spoil too much, but ultimately Boyd fulfills a legend that already exists and adds to it, though you have to question, did he actually forge it or was it already there, and then therefore it's forcing him to conform to that legend that already exists about this specific gunman and an encounter in Mexico. And then Billy's trying to go back and kind of fight that legend and be like, that's not my brother, that's not who this is. But everything seems to be stacked against him to make it where he can't actually experience what may or may not be true, just because the legend itself, that fate, is so permissive throughout that region that he's in. And this sets up the ending in general, I think. I'm just going to briefly talk about the ending. I'll try not to really spoil too much. But this is one of the best endings I've read in a long time. It uses a cycle to talk about cycles. Everything comes full circle again. As Billy interacts with another destitute canine in a very different way than he did at the beginning of the novel, it one shows what these experiences have done to him as an individual without even giving any language that really explores that. It is purely the imagery of the moment and the way that Billy reacts to that moment that makes it so powerful and really appealing to the themes. I won't say it feels appealing. I think there you could have a tendency to think it maybe feels hopeless, though the entire time you've been invited to see how Billy sets himself up to become the person he does at the end of the novel. And I also think I've seen there's a criticism about that Billy never really had noble intentions or good intentions going on this quest that he makes for himself. But I think the ending actually shows that he really wanted to do something good. He really wanted to have something noble, whether or not we as outsiders are perceiving it that way. So, do I give Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing a toast of excellence? Absolutely, I do. Even though some of its ideas and themes are absolutely belabored and beaten into the dust at times, which is kind of been my experience with the Border trilogy so far, its prose are still excellent. Its imagery is astounding at times, and these characters feel so realized and fleshed out that they're just so oddly specific and weird that you want to sit down and have a little bit more time with them than you actually get in the novel. And I think the character of Billy Parham is excellent. He's an excellent vessel for these themes about cycles and fate, while at the same time still being grounded enough and specific enough that he is his own character. He's not purely a vessel that we get to kind of experience this journey with. So, highly recommend The Crossing. You can even read it even if you don't read the other books in the Border trilogy, as All the Pretty Horses and The Crossing, even Cities of the Plain, are kind of standalone stories. It's just the first two novels come together in Cities of the Plain. I will eventually talk about Cities of the Plain on the channel, and I think in that video maybe I'll talk about the trilogy as a whole. If that's something that interests you, let me know in the comments below. But for the time being, I highly recommend The Crossing. I think it's an excellent mixture of some of McCarthy's earlier hallmarks, where he's kind of in this very mythic and mysterious land, creating kind of these hellish landscapes that test these characters and the ideals and experiences that they've had leading up to it. But at the same time being mature enough where it doesn't lean too far into that, and instead is giving us kind of very nuanced and well thought out ideas. Cheers to Cormac McCarthy and The Crossing. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you are interested in in-depth book reviews and with slight analysis alongside with it, please consider subscribing. If you enjoyed this specific book review, please give it a like. Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you got something entirely different from reading The Crossing. If you feel entirely different about the Border Trilogy or any of the ideas that I explored here, let me know. If you also like video essays and kind of general cultural analysis, mainly toward movies, look at what else I have on the channel. I also make video essays. You will find some focusing around World War II cinema and post-secularism currently. More of those will be on the way too. Again, thank you for joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in future explorations.